Hello, welcome to another Tuesday of Harry Potter. We're gonna get started because I have a lot to read today to get us to a good chapter break. So I did want to say it's National Library Week, so we're doing a lot of fun things over on the PCL, the Providence Community Library Facebook page, so stop over there, participate if you can. Today we're sharing what we're reading. So I'm not going to share that I'm reading Harry Potter because you all know that I'm already reading Harry Potter. So I'll share something else today. Keep your eye on that spot. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 3, The Night Bus. Harry was several streets away before he collapsed onto a low wall in Magnolia Crescent, panting from the effort of dragging his trunk. He sat quite still, anger still surging through him, listening to the frantic thumping of his heart. But after 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him: panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he'd never been in a worse fix. He was stranded, quite alone, in the dark Muggle world, with absolutely nowhere to go. And the worst of it was, he'd just done serious magic, which meant that he was almost certainly expelled from Hogwarts. He'd broken the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry so badly, he was surprised Ministry of Magic representatives weren't swooping down on him where he sat. Harry shivered and looked up and down Magnolia Crescent. What was going to happen to him? Would he be arrested, or would he simply be outlawed from the wizarding world? He thought of Ron and Hermione, and his heart sank even lower. Harry was sure that, criminal or not, Ron and Hermione would want to help him now, but they were both abroad, and with Hedwig gone, he had no means of contacting them. He didn't have any Muggle money either. There was a little wizard gold in the money bag at the bottom of his trunk, but the rest of the fortune his parents had left him was stored in a vault at Gringotts Wizarding Bank in London. He'd never be able to drag his trunk all the way to London. Unless... He looked down at his wand, which he was still clutching in his hand. If he was already expelled, his heart was now thumping painfully fast. A bit more magic couldn't hurt. He had the invisibility cloak he had inherited from his father. What if he bewitched the trunk to make it feather light, tied it to his broomstick, covered himself in the cloak, and flew to London? Then he could get the rest of his money out of his vault and begin his life as an outcast. It was a horrible prospect, but he couldn't sit on this wall forever, or he'd find himself trying to explain to Muggle police why he was out in the dead of night with a trunk full of spellbooks and a broomstick. Harry opened his trunk again and pushed the contents aside, looking for the invisibility cloak. But before he had found it, he straightened up suddenly, looking around him once more. A funny prickling on the back of his neck had made Harry feel he was being watched, but the street appeared to be deserted, and no lights shone from any of the large square houses. He bent over his trunk again, but almost immediately stood up once more, his hand clenched on his wand. He'd sensed, rather than heard it. Someone, or something, was standing in the narrow gap between the garage and the fence behind him. Harry squinted at the black alleyway. If only it would move, then he'd know whether it was just a stray cat or something else. Lumos, Harry muttered, and a light appeared at the end of his wand, almost dazzling him. He held it high over his head, and the pebble-dashed walls of number 2 suddenly sparkled. The garage door gleamed, and between them Harry saw, quite distinctly, the hulking outline of something very big with wide, gleaming eyes. Harry stepped backward. His legs hit his trunk, and he tripped. His wand flew out of his hand as he flung out an arm to break his fall, and he landed hard in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, and Harry threw up his hands to shield his eyes against a sudden blinding light. With a yell, he rolled back onto the pavement, just in time. A second later, a gigantic pair of wheels and headlights screeched to a halt exactly where Harry had just been lying. They belonged, as Harry saw when he raised his head, to a triple-decker, violently purple bus, which had appeared out of thin air. Gold lettering over the windshield spelled, "The Night Bus." For a split second, Harry wondered if he had been knocked silly by his fall. Then a conductor in a purple uniform leapt out of the bus and began to speak loudly to the night. "Welcome to the Night Bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. Just stick out your wand hand, step on board, and we can take you anywhere you want to go. My name is Dan Shunpike, and I will be your conductor this eve." The conductor stopped abruptly. He just caught sight of Harry, who was still sitting on the ground. Harry snatched up his wand and scrambled to his feet. Close up, he saw that Stan Shunpike was only a few years older than he was, 18 or 19 at most, with large protruding ears and quite a few pimples. What were you doing down there? Said Stan, dropping his professional manner. Fell over, said Harry. What'd you fall over for? Sniggered Stan. I didn't do it on purpose, said Harry, annoyed. One of the knees in his jeans was torn, and the hand he had thrown out to break his fall was bleeding. He suddenly remembered why he'd fallen over and turned around quickly to stare at the alleyway between the garage and fence. The night bus's headlamps were flooding it with light, and it was empty. What you looking at? Said Stan. There was a big black thing, said Harry, pointing uncertainly into the gap. Like a dog, but massive. He looked around at Stan, whose mouth was slightly open. With a feeling of unease, Harry saw Stan's eyes move to the scar on Harry's forehead. What's that on your head? Said Stan abruptly. Nothing, said Harry quickly, flattening his hair over his scar. If the Ministry of Magic was looking for him, he didn't want to make it too easy for them. What's your name? Stan persisted. Neville Longbottom, said Harry, saying the first name that came into his head. So this bus, he went on quickly, hoping to distract Stan. Did you say it goes anywhere? Yep, said Stan proudly. Anywhere you like, long as it's on land. Can't do nothing underwater. Here, he said, looking suspicious again. You did flag us down, didn't you? Stuck out your wand end, didn't you? Yes, said Harry quickly. Listen, how much would it be to get to London? 11 sickles, said Stan. But for 13 you get hot chocolate, and for 15 you get a water bottle and a toothbrush in the color of your choice. Harry rummaged once more in his trunk, extracted his money bag, and shoved some gold into Stan's hand. He and Stan then lifted his trunk, with Hedwig's cage balanced on top, up the steps of the bus. There were no seats. Instead, half a dozen brass bedsteads stood beside the curtained windows. Candles were burning in brackets beside each bed, illuminating the wood-paneled walls. A tiny wizard in a nightcap at the rear of the bus muttered, No, thanks, I'm pickling some slugs," and rolled over in his sleep. You have this one, Stan whispered, shoving Harry's trunk underneath the bed right behind the driver, who was sitting in an armchair in front of the steering wheel. This is our driver, Ernie Prang. This is Neville Longbottom, Ern. Ernie Prang, an elderly wizard wearing very thick glasses, nodded to Harry, who nervously flattened his bangs again and sat down on his bed. Take her away, Ern, said Stan, sitting down in the armchair next to Ernie's. There was another tremendous bang, and the next moment, Harry found himself flat on his bed, thrown backward by the speed of the night bus. Pulling himself up, Harry stared out of the dark window and saw that they were now bowling along a completely different street. Stan was watching Harry's stunned face with great enjoyment. This is where we was before you flagged us down, he said. Where are we, Ern? Somewhere in Wales? Arr, said Ernie. How come the muggles don't hear the bus? Said Harry. Them, said Stan contemptuously. Don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never notice nothing, they don't. Best go wake up Madam Marsh, Stan, said Ern. We'll be in Abergavenny in a minute. Stan passed Harry's bed and disappeared up a narrow wooden staircase. Harry was still looking out of the window, feeling increasingly nervous. Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of a steering wheel. The night bus kept mounting the pavement, but it didn't hit anything. Lines of lampposts, mailboxes, and trash cans jumped out of its way as it approached, and back into position once it had passed. Stan came back downstairs, followed by a faintly green witch wrapped in a traveling cloak. Here you go, Madam Marsh, said Stan happily as Ern stamped on the brake and the bed slid a foot or so toward the front of the bus. Madam Marsh clamped a handkerchief to her mouth and tottered down the steps. Stan threw her bag out after her, rammed the door shut. There was another loud bang, and they were thundering down a narrow country lane, trees leaping out of the way. Harry wouldn't have been able to sleep even if he had been traveling on a bus that didn't keep banging loudly and jumping 100 miles at a time. His stomach churned as he fell back to wondering what was going to happen to him, and whether the Dursleys had managed to get Aunt Marge off the ceiling yet. Stan had unfurled a copy of the Daily Prophet and was now reading with his tongue between his teeth. A large photograph of a sunken-faced man with long, matted black hair blinked slowly at Harry from the front page. He looked strangely familiar. That man, Harry said, forgetting his troubles for a moment. He was on the Muggle News. Stanley turned to the front page and chuckled. Sirius Black, he said, nodding. Of course he was on the Muggle News, Neville. Where you been? He gave a superior sort of chuckle at the blank look on Harry's face, removed the front page, and handed it to Harry. You ought to read the papers more, Neville. Harry held the paper up in the candlelight and read. Black still at large. Sirius Black, possibly the most infamous prisoner ever to be held in Azkaban Fortress, is still eluding capture, the Ministry of Magic confirmed today. "We are doing all that we can to recapture Black," said the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, this morning, "and we beg the magical community to remain calm." Fudge has been criticized by some members of the International Federation of Warlocks for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. "Well, really, I had to, don't you know," said an irritable Fudge. "Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance that he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone. And let's face it, who'd believe him if he did?" While Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other, the magical community lives in fear of a massacre like that of 12 years ago when Black murdered 13 people with a single curse. Harry looked into the shadowed eyes of Sirius Black, the only part of the sunken face that seemed alive. Harry had never met a vampire, but he'd seen pictures of them in his Defense Against the Dark Arts classes, and Black, with his waxy white skin, looked just like one. "Scary looking thing, ain't he?" said Stan, who'd been watching Harry read. "He murdered 13 people?" said Harry, handing the page back to Stan. "With one curse?" "Yep," said Stan, "in front of witnesses and all. Broad daylight. Big trouble it caused, didn't it, Ern?" "Arr," said Ern darkly. Stan swiveled in his armchair, his hand on the back, the better to look at Harry. "Black was a big supporter of you-know-who," he said. "What, Voldemort?" said Harry without thinking. Even Stan's pimples went white. Ern jerked the steering wheel so hard that a whole farmhouse had to jump aside to avoid the bus. "You out of your tree?" yelped Stan. "What'd you say his name for?" "Sorry," said Harry hastily. "Sorry, I forgot." "Forgot," said Stan weakly. "Blimey, my heart's going that fast." So Black was a supporter of you-know-who," Harry prompted apologetically. "Yeah," said Stan, still rubbing his chest. "Yeah, that's right. Very close to you-know-who, they say. Anyway, when little Harry Potter got the better of you-know-who," Harry nervously flattened his bangs down again. "All you-know-who's supporters was tracked down, wasn't they, Ern? Most of them knew it was all over, with you-know-who gone, and it came quiet, but not Sirius Black. I heard he thought he'd be second in command once you-know-who had taken over. Anyway, they cornered Black in the middle of a street full of Muggles, and Black took out his wand and he blasted half the street apart, and a wizard got it, and so did a dozen Muggles who got in the way. Horrible, eh? And you know what Black did then?" Stan continued in a dramatic whisper. "What?" said Harry. "Laughed," said Stan. "Just stood there and laughed. And when reinforcements from the Ministry of Magic got there, he went with 'em, quiet as anything, still laughing his head off. 'Cause he's mad, any Ern, any mad." "If he weren't when he went to Azkaban, he is now," said Ern in his slow voice. "I'd blow myself up before I set foot in that place. Serves him right, mind you, after what he did." "They had a job covering it up, didn't they, Ern?" said Stan. "Whole street blown up and all them Muggles dead? When was it they said it happened, Ern?" "Gas explosion," grunted Ernie. "And now he's out," said Stan, examining the newspaper picture of Black's gaunt face again. "Never been a breakout from Azkaban before, has there, Ern? Beats me how he did it. Frightening, eh? Mind, I don't fancy his chances against them Azkaban guards, eh, Ern?" Ernie suddenly shivered. "Talk about something else, Stan. There's a good lad. Them Azkaban guards give me the collywobbles." Stan put the paper away reluctantly, and Harry leaned against the window of the night bus, feeling worse than ever. He couldn't help imagining what Stan might be telling his passengers in a few nights' time. "Hear about that Harry Potter? Blew up his aunt. We had him in here on the night bus, didn't we, Ern? He was trying to run for it." He, Harry, had broken wizard law, just like Sirius Black. Was inflating Aunt March bad enough to plant him in Azkaban? Harry didn't know anything about the wizard prison, though everyone he'd ever heard speak of it did so in the same fearful tone. Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, had spent 2 months there only last year. Harry wouldn't soon forget the look of terror on Hagrid's face when he had been told where he was going, and Hagrid was one of the bravest people Harry knew. The night bus rolled through the darkness, scattering bushes and wastebaskets, telephone booths and trees, and Harry lay, restless and miserable, on his feather bed. After a while, Stan remembered that Harry had paid for hot chocolate, but poured it all over Harry's pillow when the bus moved abruptly from Anglesey to Aberdeen. One by one, wizards and witches in dressing gowns and slippers descended from the upper floors to leave the bus. They all looked very pleased to go. Finally, Harry was the only passenger left. "Right, Neville," said Stan, clapping his hands. "Whereabouts in London?" "Diagon Alley," said Harry. "Right-o," said Stan. "Hold tight then." Bang! They were thundering along Charing Cross Road. Harry sat up and watched buildings and benches squeezing themselves out of the night bus's way. The sky was getting a little lighter. He would lie low for a couple of hours, go to Gringotts the moment it opened, then set off. Where, he didn't know. Ern slammed on the brakes, and the night bus skidded to a halt in front of a small and shabby-looking pub, the Leaky Cauldron, behind which lay the magical entrance to Diagon Alley. "Thanks," Harry said to Ern. He jumped down the steps and helped Stan lower his trunk and Hedwig's cage onto the pavement. "Well," said Harry, "bye then." But Stan wasn't paying attention. Still standing in the doorway to the bus, he was goggling at the shadowy entrance to the Leaky Cauldron. "There you are, Harry," said a voice. Before Harry could turn, he felt a hand on his shoulder. At the same time, Stan shouted, "Blimey, Ern, come here, come here!" Harry looked up at the owner of the hand on his shoulder and felt a bucket full of ice cascade into his stomach. He had walked right into Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic himself. Stan leapt onto the pavement beside them. "What did you call Neville, Minister?" he said excitedly. Fudge, a portly little man in a long pinstriped cloak, looked cold and exhausted. "Neville?" he repeated, frowning. "This is Harry Potter." "I knew it!" Stan shouted gleefully. Ern, guess who Neville is, Ern? He's Harry Potter! I can see his scar!" "Yes," said Fudge testily. "Well, I'm very glad the night bus picked Harry up, but he and I need to step inside the Leaky Cauldron now." Fudge increased the pressure on Harry's shoulder, and Harry found himself being steered inside the pub. A stooping figure bearing a lantern appeared through the door behind the bar. It was Tom, the wizened, toothless landlord. "You've got him, Minister," said Tom. "Will you be wanting anything? Beer? Brandy?" "Perhaps a pot of tea," said Fudge, who still hadn't let go of Harry. There was a loud scraping and puffing from behind them, and Stan and Ern appeared, carrying Harry's trunk and Hedwig's cage and looking around excitedly. "How come you didn't tell us who you are, eh, Neville?" said Stan, beaming at Harry, while Ernie's owlish face peered interestedly over Stan's shoulder. "And a private parlor, please, Tom," said Fudge pointedly. "Bye," Harry said miserably to Stan and Ern as Tom beckoned Fudge toward the passage that led from the bar. "Bye, Neville," called Stan. Fudge marched Harry along the narrow passage after Tom's lantern and then to a small parlor. Tom clicked his fingers, a fire burst into life in the grate, and he bowed himself out of the room. "Sit down, Harry," said Fudge, indicating a chair by the fire. Harry sat down, feeling goosebumps rising up his arms despite the glow of the fire. Fudge took off his pinstriped cloak and tossed it aside, then hitched up the trousers of his bottle green suit and sat down opposite Harry. "I'm Cornelius Fudge, Harry, the Minister of Magic." Harry already knew this, of course. He'd seen Fudge once before, but as he had been wearing his father's invisibility cloak at the time, Fudge wasn't to know that. Tom, the innkeeper, reappeared, wearing an apron over his nightshirt and bearing a tray of tea and crumpets. He placed the tray on a table between Fudge and Harry and left the parlor, closing the door behind him. "Well, Harry," said Fudge, pouring out tea, "you've had us all in a right flap, I don't mind telling you. Running away from your aunt and uncle's house like that. I'd started to think. But you're safe, and that's what matters." Fudge buttered himself a crumpet and pushed the plate toward Harry. "Eat, Harry, you look dead on your feet. Now then, you will be pleased to hear that we have dealt with the unfortunate blowing up of Miss Marjorie Dursley. 2 members of the Accidental Magic Reversal Department were dispatched to Privet Drive a few hours ago. Miss Dursley has been punctured and her memory has been modified. She has no recollection of the incident at all. So, that's that, and no harm done." Fudge smiled at Harry over the rim of his teacup, rather like an uncle surveying a favorite nephew. Harry, who couldn't believe his ears, opened his mouth to speak, couldn't think of anything to say, and closed it again. "Ah, you're worrying about the reaction of your aunt and uncle," said Fudge. "Well, I won't deny that they are extremely angry, Harry, but they are prepared to take you back next summer as long as you stay at Hogwarts for the Christmas and Easter holidays." Harry unstuck his throat. "I always stay at Hogwarts for the Christmas and Easter holidays," he said, "and I don't ever want to go back to Privet Drive." Now, I'm sure you'll feel differently once you've calmed down," said Fudge in a worried tone. "They are your family, after all, and I'm sure you're fond of each other, very deep down." It didn't occur to Harry to put Fudge right. He was still waiting to hear what was going to happen to him now. "So all that remains," said Fudge, now buttering himself a second crumpet, "is to decide where you're going to spend the last 2 weeks of your vacation. I suggest you take a room here at the Leaky Cauldron and—" "Hang on," blurted Harry. "What about my punishment?" Fudge blinked. "Punishment? I I broke the law, Harry said. The decree for the restriction of underage wizardry. Oh, my dear boy, we're not going to punish you for a little thing like that, cried Fudge, waving his crumpet impatiently. It was an accident. We don't send people to Azkaban just for blowing up their aunts. But this didn't tally at all with Harry's past dealings with the Ministry of Magic. Last year, I got an official warning just because a house elf smashed a pudding in my uncle's house, he told Fudge, frowning. The Ministry of Magic said I'd be expelled from Hogwarts if there was any more magic there. Unless Harry's eyes were deceiving him, Fudge was suddenly looking awkward. Circumstances change, Harry. We have to take into account. In the present climate, surely you don't want to be expelled. Of course I don't, said Harry. Well then, what's all this fuss about? Laughed Fudge. Now have a crumpet, Harry, while I go and see if Tom's got a room for you. Fudge strode out of the parlor, and Harry stared after him. There was something extremely odd going on. Why had Fudge been waiting for him at the Leaky Cauldron, if not to punish him for what he'd done? And now Harry came to think of it, surely it wasn't usual for the Minister of Magic himself to get involved in matters of underage magic? Fudge came back, accompanied by Tom the innkeeper. Room 11's free, Harry, said Fudge. I think you'll be very comfortable. Just one thing, and I'm sure you'll understand. I don't want you wandering off into Muggle London, all right? Keep to Diagon Alley, and you're to be back here before dark each night. Sure you'll understand. Tom will be keeping an eye on you for me. Okay, said Harry slowly. But why? Don't want to lose you again, do we? Said Fudge with a hearty laugh. No, best we know where you are. Fudge cleared his throat loudly and picked up his pinstriped cloak. Well, I'll be off. Plenty to do, you know. Have you had any luck with Black yet? Harry asked. Fudge's finger slipped on the silver fastenings of his cloak. What's that? Oh, you've heard. Well, no, not yet, but it's only a matter of time. The Azkaban guards have never yet failed, and they are angrier than I have ever seen them. Fudge shuddered slightly. So, I'll say goodbye. He held out his hand, and Harry, shaking it, had a sudden idea. Minister, can I ask you something? Certainly, said Fudge with a smile. Well, third years at Hogwarts are allowed to visit Hogsmeade, but my aunt and uncle didn't sign the permission form. Do you think you could? Fudge was looking uncomfortable. Ah, he said. No, I'm very sorry, Harry, but as I'm not your parent or guardian. But you're the Minister of Magic, said Harry eagerly. If you gave me permission. No, I'm sorry, Harry, but rules are rules, said Fudge flatly. Perhaps you'll be able to visit Hogsmeade next year. In fact, I think it's best if you don't. Yes, well, I'll be off. Enjoy your stay, Harry. And with a last smile and shake of Harry's hand, Fudge left the room. Tom now moved forward, beaming at Harry. If you'll follow me, Mr. Potter, he said. I've already taken your things up. Harry followed Tom up a handsome wooden staircase to a door with brass number 11 on it, which Tom unlocked and opened for him. Inside was a very comfortable-looking bed, some highly polished oak furniture, a cheerfully crackling fire, and perched on top of the wardrobe. Hedwig! Harry gasped. The snowy owl clicked her beak and fluttered down onto Harry's arm. Very smart owl you've got there, chuckled Tom. Arrived about 5 minutes after you did. If there's anything you need, Mr. Potter, don't hesitate to ask. He gave another bow and left. Harry sat on his bed for a long time, absent-mindedly stroking Hedwig. The sky outside the window was changing rapidly from deep velvety blue to cold steely gray, and then slowly to pink shot with gold. Harry could hardly believe that he'd left Privet Drive only a few hours ago, that he wasn't expelled, and that he was now facing 2 completely Dursley-free weeks. It's been a very weird night, Hedwig, he yawned. And without even removing his glasses, he slumped back onto his pillows and fell asleep. Chapter 4, The Leaky Cauldron. It took Harry several days to get used to his strange new freedom. Never before had he been able to get up whenever he wanted or eat whatever he fancied. He could even go wherever he pleased, as long as it was in Diagon Alley. And as this long cobbled street was packed with the most fascinating wizard shops in the world, Harry felt no desire to break his word to Fudge and stray back into the Muggle world. Harry ate breakfast each morning in the Leaky Cauldron, where he liked watching the other guests. Funny little witches from the country up for a day's shopping, venerable-looking wizards arguing over the latest article in Transfiguration today, wild-looking warlocks, raucous dwarfs, and once what looked suspiciously like a hag who ordered a plate of raw liver from behind a thick woolen balaclava. After breakfast, Harry would go out into the backyard, take out his wand, Tap the third brick from the left above the trash bin, and stand back as the archway into Diagon Alley opened in the wall. Harry spent the long, sunny days exploring the shops and eating under the brightly colored umbrellas outside cafes, where his fellow diners were showing one another their purchases. "It's a lunoscope, old boy. No more messing around with moon charts, see?" Or else discussing the case of Sirius Black. "Personally, I won't let any of the children out alone until he's back in Azkaban." Harry didn't have to do his homework under the blankets by flashlight anymore. Now he could sit in the bright sunshine outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, finishing all his essays with occasional help from Florian Fortescue himself, who, apart from knowing a great deal about medieval witch burnings, gave Harry free Sundays once every half an hour. Once Harry had refilled his money bag with gold galleons, silver sickles, and bronze knuts from his vault at Gringotts, he had to exercise a lot of self-control not to spend the whole lot at once. He had to keep reminding himself that he had 5 years to go at Hogwarts, and how it would feel to ask the Dursleys for money for spellbooks, to stop himself from buying a handsome set of solid gold gobstones, a wizarding game rather like marbles, in which the stones squirt a nasty-smelling liquid into the other player's face when they lose a point. He was sorely tempted, too, by the perfect moving model of the galaxy in a large glass ball, which would have meant he never had to take another astronomy lesson. But the thing that tested Harry's resolution most appeared in his favorite shop, Quality Quidditch Supplies, a week after he'd arrived at the Leaky Cauldron. Curious to know what the crowd in the shop was staring at, Harry edged his way inside and squeezed in among the excited witches and wizards until he glimpsed a newly erected podium on which was mounted the most magnificent broom he had ever seen in his life. "Just come out, prototype," a square-jawed wizard was telling his companion. "It's the fastest broom in the world, isn't it, Dad?" squeaked a boy younger than Harry, who was swinging off his father's arm. "Irish International side just put in an order for 7 of these beauties," the proprietor of the shop told the crowd, "and they're favorites for the World Cup." A large witch in front of Harry moved, and he was able to read the sign next to the broom. The Firebolt. This state-of-the-art racing broom sports a streamlined, superfine handle of ash, treated with a diamond-hard polish and hand-numbered with its own registration number. Each individually selected birch twig in the broom tail has been honed to aerodynamic perfection, giving the Firebolt unsurpassable balance and pinpoint precision. The Firebolt has an acceleration of 150 miles an hour in 10 seconds and incorporates an unbreakable braking charm. Price on request. Price on request. Harry didn't like to think how much gold the Firebolt would cost. He'd never wanted anything as much in his whole life. But he'd never lost a Quidditch match on his Nimbus 2000, and what was the point in emptying his Gringotts vault for the Firebolt when he already had a very good broom? Harry didn't ask for the price, but he returned almost every day after that just to look at the Firebolt. There were, however, things that Harry needed to buy. He went to the apothecary to replenish his store of potions ingredients, and his school robes were now several inches too short in the arm and leg. He visited Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions and bought new ones. Most important of all, he had to buy his new school books, which would include those for his 2 new subjects, Care of Magical Creatures and Divination. Harry got a surprise as he looked in the bookshop window. Instead of the usual display of gold-embossed spellbooks the size of paving slabs, there was a large iron cage behind the glass that held about 100 copies of the Monster Book of Monsters. Torn pages were flying everywhere as the books grappled with each other, locked together in furious wrestling matches and snapping aggressively. Harry pulled his book list out of his pocket and consulted it for the first time. The Monster Book of Monsters was listed as the required book for Care of Magical Creatures. Now Harry understood why Hagrid had said it would come in useful. He felt relieved. He'd been wondering whether Hagrid wanted help with some terrifying new pet. As Harry entered Flourish and Blotts, the manager came hurrying toward him. "Hogwarts?" he said abruptly. "Come to get your new books?" "Yes," said Harry. "Get out of the way," said the manager impatiently, brushing Harry aside. He drew on a pair of very thick gloves, picked up a large knobbly walking stick, and proceeded toward the door of the Monster Books cage. "Hang on," said Harry quickly. "I've already got one of those." "Have you?" A look of enormous relief spread over the manager's face. "Thank heavens for that. I've been bitten 5 times already this morning." A loud ripping noise rent the air. 2 of the monster books had seized a third and were pulling it apart. "Stop it! Stop it!" cried the manager, poking the walking stick through the bars and knocking the books apart. "I'm never stocking them again. Never. It's been bedlam. I thought we'd seen the worst when we bought 200 copies of the Invisible Book of Invisibility. Cost a fortune, and we never found them. Well, is there anything else I can help you with? Yes, said Harry, looking down his book list. I need Unfogging the Future by Cassandra Blavatsky. Ah, starting divination, are you? Said the manager, stripping off his gloves and leading Harry into the back of the shop, where there was a corner devoted to fortune-telling. A small table was stacked with volumes such as Predicting the Unpredictable, Insulate Yourself Against Shocks, and Broken Balls, When Fortunes Turn Foul. Here you are, said the manager, who'd climbed a set of steps to take down a thick, black-bound book. Unfogging the Future. Very good guide to all your basic fortune-telling methods. Palmistry, crystal balls, bird entrails. But Harry wasn't listening. His eyes had fallen on another book, which was among a display on a small table. Death Omens. What to do when you know the worst is coming. Oh, I wouldn't read that if I were you, said the manager lightly, looking to see what Harry was staring at. You'll start seeing death omens everywhere. It's enough to frighten anyone to death. But Harry continued to stare at the front cover of the book. It showed a black dog, large as a bear, with gleaming eyes. It looked oddly familiar. The manager pressed Unfogging the Future into Harry's hands. Anything else? He said. Yes, said Harry, tearing his eyes away from the dogs and dazedly consulting his book list. I need Intermediate Transfiguration and the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3. Harry emerged from Flourish and Blots 10 minutes later with his new books under his arm and made his way back to the Leaky Cauldron, hardly noticing where he was going and bumping into several people. He tramped up the stairs to his room, went inside, and tipped his books onto his bed. Somebody had been in to tidy. The windows were open and sun was pouring inside. Harry could hear the buses rolling by in the unseen Muggle street behind him, and the sound of the invisible crowd below in Diagon Alley. He caught sight of himself in the mirror over the basin. It can't have been a death omen, he told his reflection defiantly. I was panicking when I saw that thing in Magnolia Crescent. It was probably just a stray dog. He raised his hand automatically and tried to make his hair lie flat. You're fighting a losing battle there, dear, said his mirror in a wheezy voice. As the days slipped by, Harry started looking wherever he went for a sign of Ron or Hermione. Plenty of Hogwarts students were arriving in Diagon Alley now, with the start of term so near. Harry met Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, his fellow Gryffindors, in Quality Quidditch Supplies, where they too were ogling the firebolt. He also ran into the real Neville Longbottom, a round-faced, forgetful boy outside Flourish and Blots. Harry didn't stop to chat. Neville appeared to have mislaid his book list and was being told off by his very formidable-looking grandmother. Harry hoped she never found out that he'd pretended to be Neville while on the run from the Ministry of Magic. Harry woke on the last day of the holidays, thinking that he would at least meet Ron and Hermione tomorrow on the Hogwarts Express. He got up, dressed, went for a last look at the firebolt, and was just wondering where he'd have lunch, when someone yelled his name, and he turned. Harry! Harry! There they were, both of them, sitting outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, Ron looking incredibly freckly, Hermione very brown, both waving frantically at him. Finally, said Ron, grinning at Harry as he sat down. We went to the Leaky Cauldron, but they said you'd left, and we went to Flourish and Blots and Madame Malkin's, and... I got all my school stuff last week, Harry explained. And how come you know I'm staying at the Leaky Cauldron? Dad, said Ron simply. Mr. Weasley, who worked at the Ministry of Magic, would of course have heard the whole story of what had happened to Aunt Marge. Did you really blow up your aunt? Said Hermione in a very serious voice. I didn't mean to, said Harry, while Ron roared with laughter. I just lost control. It's not funny, Ron, said Hermione sharply. Honestly, I'm amazed Harry wasn't expelled. So am I, admitted Harry. Forget expelled. I thought I was going to be arrested. He looked at Ron. Your dad doesn't know why Fudge let me off, does he? Probably because it's you, isn't it? Shrugged Ron, still chuckling. Famous Harry Potter and all that? I'd hate to see what the Ministry'd do to me if I blew up an aunt. Mind you, they'd have to dig me up first, because Mum would have killed me. Anyway, you can ask Dad yourself this evening. We're staying at the Leaky Cauldron tonight, too. So you can come to King's Cross with us tomorrow. Hermione's there as well. Hermione nodded, beaming. Mum and Dad dropped me off this morning with all my Hogwarts things. Excellent, said Harry happily. So have you got all your new books and stuff? Look at this, said Ron, pulling a long, thin box out of a bag and opening it. Brand new wand. 14 inches, willow, containing 1 unicorn tail hair. And we've got all our books. He pointed to a large bag under his chair. What about those monster books, eh? The assistant nearly cried when we said we wanted 2. What's all that, Hermione? Harry asked, pointing at not one, but 3 bulging bags in the chair next to her. Well, I'm taking more new subjects than you, aren't I? Said Hermione. Those are my books for arithmancy, care of magical creatures, divination, the study of ancient runes, muggle studies. What are you doing muggle studies for? Said Ron, rolling his eyes at Harry. You're muggle-born. Your mom and dad are muggles. You already know all about muggles. But it'll be fascinating to study them from the wizarding point of view, said Hermione earnestly. Are you planning to eat or sleep at all this year, Hermione? Asked Harry, while Ron sniggered. Hermione ignored them. I still got 10 galleons, she said, checking her purse. It's my birthday in September, and Mom and Dad gave me some money to get myself an early birthday present. How about a nice book? Said Ron innocently. No, I don't think so, said Hermione composedly. I really want an owl. I mean, Harry's got Hedwig, and you've got Errol. I haven't, said Ron. Errol's a family owl. All I've got is Scabbers. He pulled his pet rat out of his pocket. And I want to get him checked over, he added, placing Scabbers on the table in front of them. I don't think Egypt agreed with him. Scabbers was looking thinner than usual, and there was a definite droop to his whiskers. There's a magical creature shop just over there, said Harry, who knew Diagon Alley very well by now. You could see if they've got anything for Scabbers, and Hermione can get her owl. So they paid for their ice cream and crossed the street to the magical menagerie. There wasn't much room inside. Every inch of wall was hidden by cages. It was smelly and very noisy because the occupants of these cages were all squeaking, squawking, jabbering, or hissing. The witch behind the counter was already advising a wizard on the care of double-ended newts, so Harry, Ron, and Hermione waited, examining the cages. A pair of enormous purple toads sat gulping wetly and feasting on dead blowflies. A gigantic tortoise with a jewel-encrusted shell was glittering near the window. Poisonous orange snails were oozing slowly up the side of their glass tank, and a fat white rabbit kept changing into a silk top hat and back again, with a loud popping noise. Then there were cats of every color, a noisy cage of ravens, a basket of funny custard-colored fur balls that were humming loudly, and on the counter a vast cage of sleek black rats that were playing some sort of skipping game using their long, bald tails. The double-ended newt wizard left, and Ron approached the counter. It's my rat, he told the witch. He's been a bit off color since I brought him back from Egypt. Bang him on the counter, said the witch, pulling a pair of heavy black spectacles out of her pocket. Ron lifted Scabbers out of his inside pocket and placed him next to the cage of his fellow rats, who stopped their skipping tricks and scuffled to the wire for a better look. Like nearly everything Ron owned, Scabbers the rat was second-hand. He had once belonged to Ron's brother Percy, and a bit battered. Next to the glossy rats in the cage, he looked especially woebegone. Said the witch, picking up Scabbers. How old is this rat? Dunno, said Ron. Quite old. He used to belong to my brother. What powers does he have? Said the witch, examining Scabbers closely. The truth was that Scabbers had never shown the faintest trace of interesting powers. The witch's eyes moved from Scabbers' tattered left ear to his front paw, which had a toe missing, and tutted loudly. He's been through the mill, this one, she said. He was like that when Percy gave him to me, said Ron defensively. An ordinary common or garden rat like this can't be expected to live longer than 3 years or so, said the witch. Now, if you were looking for something a bit more hard-wearing, you might like one of these. She indicated the black rats, who promptly started skipping again. Ron muttered, show-offs. Well, if you don't want a replacement, you can try this rat tonic, said the witch, reaching under the counter and bringing out a small red bottle. Okay, said Ron. How much? Ouch! Ron buckled as something huge and orange came soaring from the top of the highest cage, landed on his head, and then propelled itself, spitting madly at Scabbers. No, Crookshanks, no! Cried the witch. But Scabbers shot from between her hands like a bar of soap, landed splay-legged on the floor, and then scampered for the door. Scabbers! Ron shouted, racing out of the shop after him. Harry followed. It took them nearly 10 minutes to catch Scabbers, who'd taken refuge under a waste paper bin outside Quality Quidditch Supplies. Ron stuffed the trembling rat back into his pocket and straightened up, massaging his head. What was that? It was either a very big cat or a quite small tiger, said Harry. Where's Hermione? Probably getting her owl. They made their way back up the crowded street to the magical menagerie. As they reached it, Hermione came out, but she wasn't carrying an owl. Her arms were clamped tightly around the enormous ginger cat. You bought that monster? Said Hermione, his mouth hanging open. He's gorgeous, isn't he? Said Hermione, glowing. That was a matter of opinion, thought Harry. The cat's ginger fur was thick and fluffy, but it was definitely a bit bow-legged, and its face looked grumpy and oddly squashed, as though it had run headlong into a brick wall. Now that Scabbers was out of sight, however, the cat was purring contentedly in Hermione's arms. Hermione, that thing nearly scalped me, said Ron. He didn't mean to, did you, Crookshanks? Said Hermione. And what about Scabbers? Said Ron, pointing at the lump in his chest pocket. He needs rest and relaxation. How's he going to get it with that thing around? That reminds me, you forgot your rat tonic, said Hermione, slapping the small red bottle into Ron's hand. And stop worrying. Crookshanks will be sleeping in my dormitory and Scabbers in yours. What's the problem? Poor Crookshanks. That witch said she'd been in there for ages. No one wanted him. I wonder why, said Ron sarcastically as they set off toward the Leaky Cauldron. They found Mr. Weasley sitting in the bar reading the Daily Prophet. Harry, he said, smiling as he looked up. How are you? Fine, thanks, said Harry as he, Ron, and Hermione joined Mr. Weasley with all their shopping. Mr. Weasley put down his paper, and Harry saw the now familiar picture of Sirius Black staring up at him. They still haven't caught him, then? He asked. No, said Mr. Weasley, looking extremely grave. They've pulled us all off our regular jobs at the ministry to try and find him, but no luck so far. Would we get a reward if we caught him? Asked Ron. It'd be good to get some more money. Don't be ridiculous, Ron, said Mr. Weasley, who on closer inspection looked very strained. Black's not going to be caught by a 13-year-old wizard. It's the Azkaban guards who will get him back. You mark my words. At that moment, Mrs. Weasley entered the bar, laden with shopping bags and followed by the twins, Fred and George, who were about to start their 5th year at Hogwarts. The newly elected head boy, Percy, and the Weasleys' youngest child and only girl, Ginny. Ginny, who'd always been very taken with Harry, seemed even more heartily embarrassed than usual when she saw him, perhaps because he had saved her life during their previous year at Hogwarts. She went very red and muttered, "Hello," without looking at him. Percy, however, held out his hand, solemnly, as though he and Harry had never met, and said, "Harry, how nice to see you." "Hello, Percy," said Harry, trying not to laugh. "I hope you're well," said Percy pompously, shaking hands. It was rather like being introduced to the mayor. "Very well, thanks." "Harry," said Fred, elbowing Percy out of the way and bowing deeply. "Simply splendid to see you, old boy." "Marvelous," said George, pushing Fred aside and seizing Harry's hand in turn. "Absolutely spiffing." Percy scowled. "That's enough now," said Mrs. Weasley. "Mum," said Fred, as though he'd only just spotted her and seizing her hand too. "How really corking to see you." "I said that's enough," said Mrs. Weasley, depositing her shopping in an empty chair. "Hello, Harry dear. I suppose you've heard our exciting news?" She pointed to the brand new silver badge on Percy's chest. "Second head boy in the family," she said, swelling with pride. "And last," Fred muttered under his breath. "I don't doubt that," said Mrs. Weasley, frowning suddenly. "I noticed they haven't made you two prefects." "What do we want to be prefects for?" said George, looking revolted at the very idea. "It'd take all the fun out of life." Ginny giggled. "You want to set a better example for your sister," snapped Mrs. Weasley. "Ginny's got other brothers to set her an example, Mother," said Percy loftily. "I'm going up to change for dinner." He disappeared, and George heaved a sigh. "We tried to shut him in a pyramid," he told Harry, "but Mum spotted us." Okay, there's a break there, so I'm going to stop. We're on page 63 in the chapter, The Leaky Cauldron. Come back tomorrow and we'll finish the chapter and get on the Hogwarts Express. Have a great Tuesday.